Hello and welcome back to the Bullfrog Pod, the only Rory Gallagher podcast. Today we're going to keep going with our deep dive into Taste, and we're going to talk about their two studio albums. We're going to talk kind of through the music on them, the songwriting, the recording experience, and how these albums kind of perform. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you check out the first two. And if you haven't enjoyed any of them, then just don't ever let me know that, because that'll crush me. But yeah, enjoy, and if you want to support the show, make sure to follow us on Instagram, sign up to our mailing list via the link in the description, and share this with your mates. Enjoy the show. Okay, so the Rory Gallagher website has this to say about the release. The opener, Blister on the Moon, with its slashing chords and throbbing riff, is a proto-heavy metal classic that stands as one of Taste's finest moments. Leadbelly's Leaving Blues is a showcase for Gallagher's bottleneck prowess and instrumental versatility that ventures into prog rock territory. The self-penned Sugar Mama is a blues-drenched monster that creates a dynamic contrast with the soulful acoustic strains that follow on Hail. Born on the Wrong Side of Time juxtaposes melodic hard rock riffing and acoustic folk accents. Same Old Story and Dual Carriageway Pain illustrate the band's potent ability to marry blues power to rock and roll. Catfish is a blues standard that at 8 minutes long provides ample opportunity to stretch out and create a monster jam that became a staple of the band's live show. The album ends with I'm Moving On, a stripped-down country blues cover of Hank Snow's 1950s chart topper that was also covered by Ray Charles and the Rolling Stones. Reviews were somewhat mixed upon the album's release. In April 1969, what they lack in style, they make up for energy and enthusiasm, Melody Maker declared. The NME felt the enthusiasm tends to be overbearing, but there's some goodness there as well. But the album made the top 10 in Holland and went down particularly well across Europe, where Taste swiftly became established headliners. Taste and Rory Gallagher do seem huge in Europe and to European fans. The album was well received and sold approximately 200,000 copies in the first year of release. This isn't bad for a debut. I'll circle back on the commercial success of Taste later in their story towards the end, but for now I'll just go through the debut. So if you're listening along, I would recommend having the album beside you or open, or maybe before listening to this episode you want to listen to it, or maybe you want to listen to this review and then listen to the album after. But I suppose this is kind of the first real dive into what I want to do with this podcast, and that is, really dig into the music and listen to the kind of the discography of Rory Gallagher, and no more better to start than the first Taste record. So I agree with what the Rory Gallagher website says. Blister on the Moon is a proto-heavy metal song. It actually gives me the Who vibes. I love the chords, I love the melody, and what is particularly striking is how good the production is for being done in one day. Nowadays you could labour over recording for weeks to get this sound. So much of this I think is down to the energy of the band. I believe the songs were largely tracked live, with overdubs being handled solely by Rory. Someone who I found out is a big fan of this record is Glenn Tipton of metal band Judas Priest. He actually goes as far to say he connected more with this than the more successful follow-up, On the Boards. He likens the opening track to Cream in a cool interview I found with him discussing the album. There's nice acoustic guitar in the mix. I've taken this as a jumping on point to learn this track, a nice and somewhat simple part to pick up by ear. There's some cool videos of this track live, and I managed to get a hold of a second-hand copy of a Taste compilation box set called I'll Remember, and this features an alternate version of Blister on the Moon, as well as the Belfast demo. There isn't a crazy amount of difference between the two versions. I do prefer the album version, but that's probably just because it's the album version. I can say that I much prefer the Taste Mark II lineups playing on it over the Taste Mark I playing. It's not as cohesive and not as recognisable. Rory's playing is of course great. I'm not fixed on how I want to review these, but I'd say for now I'll try a score system, but don't be upset if I rate your favourite less than another. These mean nothing. I'd say every song from Rory Gallagher is a 10 out of 10 for me. You know, I'm not... there's not a single song that I found listening to him that I have thought, this is shite, this is terrible. But what I will say is that this one is a solid 7 out of 10, and we'll kind of just go from there, and we'll try and reserve the 10s and the 9s for the real, you know, classic Gallagher staples. But I'm basing this solely on that there are Gallagher songs that are 10s for me that are also in this discography and in obviously his solo discography. So Blister on the Moon, 7 out of 10, and a great way to open up the album. So next up is a back-to-back hit of two blues standards, Leaving Blues and Sugar Mama. The choice of these two tracks is a real testimony to Rory's childhood love of old blues and folk singers. Leaving Blues was originally released in 1941 by Leadbelly, recorded in 1940. It's a nice blues standard. Sugar Mama is credited as far back as 1934. Country bluesman Yank Rachel, or maybe it's Rachel, I'm not sure, but we'll go for Yank Rachel, recorded a track titled Sugar Farm Blues. Yank is an old sort of statesman of the blues genre and its progression, and also was a big mandolin player. Tampa Red then recorded and released two versions of a track titled Sugar Mama Blues, shortly after Yank's Sugar Farm Blues. The two versions are titled Sugar Mama Blues No. 1 and No. 2 respectively. Sonny Boy Williamson then, a collaborator of Yank's, recorded his take on Tampa's Sugar Mama Blues in 1937, and he is often credited as the composer of Sugar Mama. His version is usually cited as the most popular of these early takes on it. Since the 30s, Howlin' Wolf, John Lee Hooker, Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac and of course Taste have recorded versions and released them. Again, this testifies Rory's love of blues. The album credits Sonny Boy as a writer and Rory as the arranger. Something we'll cover in an episode about the guitar styles of Rory is his ability to play with the slide and open tuning inspired blues of these early blues guitarists. But it is my understanding that a lot of these blues guys used open tunings, and the use of open tunings in this era came from the lack of guitar educational material. So no chord sheets and no tuning examples. Often guitarists would tune to a chord. Now again, we can go through this more in detail later in a dedicated episode about the guitar stylings maybe of Rory Gallagher or the guitar equipment. We'll work something out. But it's a cool thing to know, and it's worth mentioning in passing. Both the Taste versions are great adaptations. I'd give them both a 6 out of 10. I love the versions of Sugar Mama you can find, and it's a track I really wish Rory took from this era into his solo career, as it's something I think Rory in the 80s particularly would have played brilliantly. The rhythm section is solid, and the drums on Sugar Mama are very brooding, kind of Sabbath-esque. Up to this point, I think we're firmly in the space of what you'd expect Rory to sound like, but I think the next track, Hail, showcases another side of him. You know, up to this point, it's what I would have thought Rory sounded like. It's just, you know, straight blues rock, a little bit of sort of, you know, the Who stylings about it was kind of a cool catch. But again, up to this point, I wasn't surprised. But this next track, it's acoustic blues, it's fingerstyle blues. And remember that Rory is only 20. He's got such a grasp of these skills and styles, I'd argue years before Clapton even did. I think in 4 tracks alone, Taste's music is way more varied than that of Cream's. I'd throw this in as a 6 out of 10 as well. It is an original track penned by Gallagher, unlike the previous 2 bluesy songs, and it gives a small bit of insight into the jazz elements that Rory would bring in heavily on the follow-up album. Born on the Wrong Side of Time is a big standout track for me, also penned by Gallagher. It blends the hard rock aspects of Taste with some of the more psychedelic folk influences. When the track switches from the thumping, overdriven guitar section to the almost delicate acoustic section, it seems to draw inspiration from the late 60s psychedelic and folk movements with more introspective and somewhat fantastical lyrics. Like when Rory sings about Great Master Time, it's cool imagery, but also poignant in that Rory never got the fame he deserved, and with 60 years hindsight, you could almost say he himself was born on the wrong side of time, now that he is hailed as this mythical guitar cowboy. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. The next run of tracks is the best on the record. Next up is Dual Carriageway Pain. It's got this real modern blues vibe, something like you'd have heard in the early Black Keys albums, especially with the simplicity and catchiness of that main riff. 100% reminds me heavily of Jack White and the White Stripes. Jack White is a huge blues guy, and he, despite being 30 years or more younger than Rory, had a lot of the same influences. I'm unsure if Jack ever cited Rory Gallagher as an influence. If someone knows anything about that, let me know, but I couldn't find anything. I would say, though, it's not unfair to assume that in his love for blues rock and 60s pop, Jack White became at least aware of Rory's music, if not a fan. But aside from the White Stripes style guitar, the rhythm section on this track stand out massively, and this continues into the next track. I'd give Dual Carriage by Pain a 7 out of 10. Next up is Same Old Story. If I could liken this to any other blues guy, I would say Stevie Ray Vaughan. Two very expressive players on their guitars. It's got a more minor blues feel to it. It's also penned by Rory. It lends into the jazz influences that Rory would carry on to the next album, but it's so apparent the jazz influence in his playing and his chord voicings in this song particularly. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. It's cool and it's good to listen to. John Wilson and Richard McCracken give Rory the backing that not only propels his virtuosity, but rivals it. In the next epic 7-minute long blues jam, Catfish. Rory didn't write this one. This is another traditional blues song written by Robert Petway and released in 1941. Muddy Waters later released a version similar to this for his track Rolling Stone, which is the track that the rock band the Rolling Stones would draw their name from. Without delving too much on this track, it's great. It's what I would imagine was an insight into a Taste gig at the time. I love this track too, and when I hear a blues guitarist drop a version of it, I love it. I'd give this a 7 out of 10, but I would highly recommend Gary Clark Jr.'s take on this, Catfish Blues. It's a fantastic guitar song. So closing out the record is a very McCartney era-esque cover of Hank Snow's country standard, originally released by Snow in 1950, I'm Moving On. And this is a great way to close it. It again has great playing all around. The lyrics are somewhat fitting to Rory's nature and constant moving we've seen in these first few years. It again showcases Rory's inspiration and his awareness for these influences. He obviously had heard some amazing music growing up and was drawing on it for these originals, and he also had to pay homage in his own way and give this track a 7 out of 10. So we've looked solely at the original release of the record, and I've omitted any of the bonus tracks that were added in the compilation box set, I'll Remember. But they're not bad songs either, but our focus will be the studio albums as they were released, and any bonus tracks we miss or don't pick up on, we've got a dedicated episode, so stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out later in the year. It's not part of this initial run, but it's coming just because with every album that we've picked up on and we've listened to, there's always other songs from that era that were recorded but not released with the main studio album, and the series will focus on the main releases, and we will touch back or circle back to those, if you want to say it like that. We'll circle back to them in a dedicated episode for just the bonus tracks. So Glenn Tipton, in the interview discussing the self-titled album, goes on to say, "Believe it or not, Rory Gallagher was a bigger inspiration to me than Jimi Hendrix. Rory had more to do with me deciding that I wanted to make a career out of playing the guitar than anybody. My favourite track is Dual Carriage by Pain. I don't know why it's called that. It's got nothing to do with roads or motorways or anything. I think it's about a man whose girlfriend or wife is playing around. Rory sings the lyrics superbly in that Irish brogue of his. I can just picture him in that lumberjack shirt he always used to wear, with that pained expression on his face. It's marvellous stuff. Blister on the Moon reminds me of Cream. Leaving Blues and Born on the Wrong Side of the Time, what a great title, are also fine tracks. Tastes were a bit more restrained and balanced than Rory was when he went solo. That was when he started to pull himself forward as more of a guitar hero. Like I said at the start, Rory Gallagher is the reason I play guitar, no doubt about it. So I've never listened to Judas Priest, but after reading Glenn Tipton's review of this album, I will, knowing that another guitarist is praising Rory Gallagher. Following the disbanding of Cream, Clapton and Ginger Baker became part of supergroup Blind Faith. The band featured Clapton and Baker alongside the former members of rock band Traffic, Steve Winwood and Rick Gretsch. Blind Faith formed in 1969 from the ashes of Cream and the Spencer Davis Group, driven by Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood's desire to explore new musical styles. After Cream's breakup due to internal conflicts, Clapton teamed up with Winwood, who had left his own band for similar reasons. They started jamming together, and eventually Cream's drummer Ginger Baker joined them. Despite some initial hesitation, they formed Blind Faith, adding Rick Gretsch, or maybe it's Grech, anyway, on bass. However, their manager's push for quick success clashed with the band's wish for artistic freedom, creating tension from the start. So I don't know anything really about this group before this research, but I knew Steve Winwood and Clapton's friendship. There was a lot of tension and drama within Blind Faith, and in particular with their management. We could really talk about that for another 30 minutes, but that's not what we care about. So Clapton, as keen a Rory supporter as ever, invited Taste to open for Blind Faith across their US tour dates in support of their debut album. That's a pretty good album, by the way. Not amazing by any means, but it's cool. This is Blind Faith's debut album I'm talking about. It's in fact their only album, and it's cool. It's really good, worth listening to. The musicality on the playing it's fantastic, as you'd expect with Clapton and Steve Winwood. But it's cool that, you know, prior to the debut album, Taste played on the Farewell Cream tour. Then they recorded and released this album. Or sorry, they recorded the debut album, then they toured on the Farewell tour, then they released the debut album, and now they're on the Blind Faith tour. So in the time that Clapton disbanded one band and formed another band, you could call them both supergroups really, with their incredible members, but it's just the timing is incredible. It really is, you know. And I would say seeing Rory Gallagher at this time would have been amazing. To see Taste at this time, to see Taste on the Cream tour would have been great, and then to see them again in the US with Blind Faith would have been fantastic. So, like I said, there was a lot of tension with Blind Faith at this time. While Taste played well, Blind Faith were imploding, and Donal recalls the tour was poorly organised. He says, "It had always been a dream of Rory's to play music in America, but once we got to America, the Blind Faith tour was a shambles. It was very badly managed, chaotic. They didn't have enough material ready, so Eric and Ginger ended up having to do Cream numbers, which is what the audience wanted anyway, but not what Eric and Steve had formed Blind Faith to do. Everything about that tour was a mess. It really felt cobbled together, and due to Blind Faith's controversial album cover, which was featuring a young topless girl, their record release had been delayed, so the audiences weren't familiar with the new songs. Rory was unhappy with Eddie and disliked playing stadiums, preferring clubs, and animosity was building in the band. Eric worked out something was wrong with Taste and asked me one time, "What's wrong with the guys?" He could feel the vibes. Rory took on an air of depression on that tour. But people took to Taste on this tour. Supposedly every night they would outperform Blind Faith, causing Clapton to have more than a few panic attacks. Taste, Blind Faith and a bevy of other acts travelled in a chartered Greyhound bus. There were 52 men on board and one woman, Bonnie Bramlett, who performed with her husband as Delaney and Bonnie and friends. Donal hung out with Bonnie Bramlett. They'd go shopping together. To Donal, America was still a wonderland. And then one morning in August, they picked up the newspapers at a filling station in the desert. Donal recalls they were full of Sharon Tate murders. Bonnie went to pieces. One of the victims, Jay Sebring, was her hairdresser, her friend. Suddenly we saw this other side of America. So Taste were well received in the US audiences, but Eddie Kennedy had done very little for the band there. And at the tour's end, they found no further US dates booked, and Polydor were keen for a new album. So it was a successful tour for Taste to get recognition in America, and for them to make these, you know, new connections, for Donal to become friends with Bonnie Bramlett. But I suppose, like Donal said there, it was eye-opening to see the way America, you know, could be at that time, and some of the shocking cultural moments that happened. And yeah, Eddie Kennedy's kind of poor management on that behalf. You know, there was no Taste solo dates booked for the US, which I think is a massive fumble. I think a better solution there would have been to have Taste hang around for another few months with a few club dates, and I think, you know, Rory would have felt happier with that. I think he would have shifted that kind of air of depression that was hanging around towards the end of the Blind Faith tour, and I think the band would have just really found another footing in America. But like I said, at the end of the tour, there was no further US dates booked, and Polydor were keen for another Taste album. So the album notes indicate that the band had already recorded what was going to be the follow-up record, On the Boards. Although some places seem to say that it was after this US tour, I believe that it was recorded in November 1968. So not long after the first record was recorded, but before the first record came out, and sort of, I think, after the Cream farewell tour. So we'll go with that narrative. It was yet again, or once again, produced by Tony Colton, who I will get back to, I promise. Just stay tuned because he is great. For now, though, he was once again serving as producer. Along with Tony Colton is a guy called Eddie Offord. He went on to co-produce most of the Yes albums, Heads, Hands and Feet, and some of John Lennon's Imagine, as well as some of Rory's solo career. Rory had this to say regarding the self-titled record and how it fed into the follow-up. Yes, although taste is a wee bit overlooked, particularly for the sound, if you listen to it now, songs like Blister on the Moon and tracks like that as a straightforward rocking sound, I sometimes listen to it now and think, we should get that 8-track sound again. A tough sound, very open space compared with the 24-track Chemist sound, but On the Boards was a nice collision because we were moving towards little jazz-tinged touches and I was playing bits of saxophone. Rory bought his saxophone ahead of recording the Taste album, On the Boards, on which he played the sax on the songs It's Happened Before, It'll Happen Again, and the title song. Rory recalls, I still play bits and pieces. On Tattoo, it's on A Million Miles Away. There's a little hit on Hands Off and The Seventh Son of the Seventh Son. When I started playing, I was going to play actively on stage, 2 guitars to 1 sax number, about that, but my interest in sax ebbed a bit. I was going through a jazz phase, very fanatical, back in 69 to 70. I'm going to resurrect it one of these days. Playing sax with just bass and drums, it's alright if you're Ornette Coleman, but when you've got to take your guitar off and pick up a sax. So he was largely into this jazz-influenced space in the Taste era. Taste's second studio album, On the Boards, was released on New Year's Day 1970. Gallagher composed all 10 tunes and demonstrated a versatility few could have imagined. Alongside driving blues rockers were the more sombre acoustic ballads and experimental jazz blues infusions, with Gallagher playing alto saxophone. No one else in contemporary rock music at the time was creating anything comparable. The jazz influences you could hear on the self-titled record come through here in full. So we'll kick it off straight away with a track-by-track discussion by saying that On the Boards has the better album opener of the 2 Taste studio albums, and it sets the bar high for Rory's discography going forward. The track, of course, is the iconic What's Going On. It is a classic guitar riff and a classic Rory riff. Its stereo doubling is a testament to Tony Colton's production. The rhythm section is so locked in with Rory on this record, it's sad to think how amazing they would have continued to be if they hadn't parted ways. Lester Bands, a music journalist for the Rolling Stone at the time, had this to say about the opening track. From the first notes of What's Going On, the tightness and precision of this band's instrumentalists is evident. The bass always complements the lead perfectly, never resorting to Jack Bruce fidgetings, and the crackling power of the guitar solo is made doubly heady by Rory Gallagher's unerring sense of restraint. I have linked this full review, and we will quote it some more, but it's worth reading as he was very much not a fan of the first Taste record, but praised this second one. All in all, What's Going On to me is perfect. It's my go-to Gallagher riff to play on the guitar. It's so recognisably Rory, but it has this hard rock Sabbath feel to it, especially in the kind of slightly more restrained chorus section. It's brilliant. I can safely give this song the first 10 out of 10 of Rory's discography, and that's kind of why I was holding off on it from the first record, because I know that this song's coming up and this is an all-time top 5 Rory song for me. It's just incredible. I was really loving this riff and the guitar in this track when I was about 14, 15, and this, paired with Hosier's To Be Alone, gave me a cool understanding of the minor pentatonic scale shapes, and this inspired me to write the track Blue Blues, which was featured with my band Baroda back in 2021. The guitar throughout is heavily inspired by Gallagher, and as I own the music, I'll include a little snippet in this episode. Okay, back on track by track. Railway and Gun. The Rory Gallagher website says Railway and Gun is an emphatic slide of blues purism. It starts off with this almost bluegrass riff, showing yet another intricacy of Gallagher's playing and his grasp on the guitar language. He effortlessly moves this chicken-picking section into a sludgy blues shuffle. This is what I'd sort of see as typical Gallagher before starting this podcast journey anyways. It's brilliant. Already 2 tracks in, and this record is huge sounding. The compositions are more refined, the production is bigger, but still in that power trio field. It's great. I'd give this a 7 out of 10. That bluegrass lick is a nightmare to play if anyone has tried learning it. It's a lot of fun though if you want to give it a go. So we've talked a lot about Rory Gallagher's jazz influences, and this next track and the title track really show this. It's happened before, it'll happen again. Effortless jazz playing from the band. McCracken and Wilson shine on this big time. The bass line is intricate and so precise. I'd love to know more about McCracken's bass rig in the Taste era. I've got a few ideas from live videos on what he was using and what he played often, but the bass in this track in particular is great. It showcases that these guys are on the same level as Rory and they're equal musicians as he is. This is a 7 out of 10 easy. If the Day Was Any Longer is up next. This again really showing Rory's versatility as a songwriter and musician. It stylistically gives me John Lennon and James Taylor vibes, even kind of Cat Stevens feels to it. The introspective and slight psychedelic tinge to the lyrics and meaning. It's a great folk pop tune that sits nicely in the mix of tracks. The album is powered through to here, and this ballad slots in nicely. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 as well. It's beautiful and it's a lot of fun to play on the guitar, but Taste's folk pop comes to a peak I think later in this album, and we'll circle back to that. Unrelated to this track, but I've got a folk pop kind of song that I wrote in 2019. It's nowhere near as good as this, obviously, but it's the same kind of vibe, and hearing this track always reminds me of my own song, which is called If It Ever Stops Raining. And I'll play a short snippet of the voice memo I recorded back in 2019 here on the podcast. The full voice memo will be posted on the Bullfrog socials, etc. Rory Gallagher. The bass is thumping along on this track, and again, this isn't a million miles away from the kind of blues-inspired garage rock that Jack White would later release. This is a great song. It lifts the album up after the folk ballad before. There's this riff they circle back to a lot, and the drums drop down to just a steady bass kick. This section in particular is great. Again, the arrangement and intricacies like this are far greater on this record than on the self-titled one. This one's a 7 out of 10, and it's massive White Stripes and Black Keys vibes yet again. So Eat My Words is the first time I think we get Rory rocking out on the slide. He's a great slide blues player. It's just drenched in that classic Rory Gallagher live blues feel. It has a nice pulse to it. I don't have a lot to say about this one other than it shows early on Rory's slide skills. I think I'll link a great article about Rory's slide playing, in particular his go-to slide guitar, which was a 1959 Fender Esquire. So anyone who doesn't know, the Esquire is a telly-shaped Fender electric guitar. And as I understand it, the Esquire and Telecaster are closely related, with the Esquire being the single pickup predecessor to the two pickup Telecaster. In 1950, the two pickup version of the Esquire was introduced and renamed the Broadcaster. A trademark with conflict with another manufacturer led the Broadcaster to be briefly named the Nocaster, before finally becoming the Telecaster in 1951. While the single pickup version retained the Esquire name, they had a second run in the late 50s and 60s that had the pickup cavity routed so mods like Rory's could be performed on the guitar. Another great and notable example of a classic Esquire player and image is Bruce Springsteen. His signature Telecaster on the Born to Run cover is actually a modded Esquire. We can dive more into this on the episode all about gear and guitars, because I could be here for hours talking about this. I'll also link a cool video of Joe Bonamassa playing slide in Rory style and explaining his techniques. It's a great watch. But Eat My Words is a solid 6 out of 10. Okay, next up is the second big jazz track on the album, and it's the title track of the album, On the Boards. So Lester Bands, in his review, had this to say: "The most moving and advanced piece here is On the Boards. The muted melancholy is as pregnant with deep restrained sorrow as B.B. King's The Thrill Is Gone, but further advanced from the limited blues bag. The words are a terse epistle of suffering and remorse. Someone has taken my day and turned it to night, who turned out the light. I don't know what it means, but it's too much to hear. The long instrumental track which follows is even more impressive than the improvisations so clearly thought out, that it seems a shame to even suggest that Taste be classed in any way with that great puddle of British blues bands. Everybody else is just woodshedding. Taste have arrived. I couldn't agree more. Apologies for the poor reading of that excerpt. It's a lot of words and a lot of words that I don't know. But I couldn't agree more. The expected blues rock of Rory Gallagher is nothing too surprising for me, and even his more folk pop songs don't seem as forgotten or far off. But this long, jazz-based jam is incredible, and not just for Rory, for Taste. I feel the band all shine on this track in a way they don't on any other track. It is comparable to The Doors, and maybe to later Arctic Monkeys jazz-influenced music, and even to jazz icons like Miles Davis. And it even goes far to say it's not a stone's throw off something that Genesis or Rush would later write. It's a brilliant song, and I'd love to have heard the band move more into this style in the 70s. If they didn't break up, I think it would have been great to see, the band really take this jazz band feel and push it into their later albums if they stayed together and had later albums. They'd have been up there with Steely Dan. This is another 10 out of 10 and makes me wish Taste had another album after this. The lyrics are some of the best as well, as Lester Band said. Okay, next up we get If I Don't Sing, I'll Cry. This one's cool. It's got a great blues shuffle to it to keep the track moving. The bass really cuts through in the mix in this one. Tony Colton's production is so understated, and McCracken's bass is flawless. The way Rory sings the chorus, it really reminds me of John Lennon. This isn't far off something he'd have written for the White Album, maybe. John always had these forays into blues rock, and we will come back to a John and Rory story later in this adventure, but I know from this that Rory was a fan of John Lennon's, and I know John Lennon was a big supporter of Taste, and I knew from these days Rory was, quote, going somewhere. This is a solid 7 out of 10. So we mentioned we'd come back to the folk pop stylings of If the Day Was Any Longer, and we get it here with the penultimate track, See Here. What a great song. Off the bat, it has this modern folk indie vibe to it. That first guitar section wouldn't sound out of place if Bon Iver played it. I've only found one person playing it online, and I'll link the video, but on YouTube there's a cover of it, and it has the tuning down as D, A, D, A, D, F sharp, which is a very odd tuning indeed. I'm going to give it a go with this tuning and try and work it out, but it's such a quiet, contemplative track to have this close to the end of the album. It perfectly segues into the closer, which is a 60s blues pop masterclass I'll remember. It's a nice sentiment with the hindsight of this being the last Taste song on the last studio album by Taste. It once again showcases the studio perfection of McCracken and Wilson, and is the last blast of Tony Colton's production wizardry. I'd give them both 7 out of 10 respectively. This is a great record, and it is sad that this is the end of Taste's studio career, but not the end of their story. But like I said, listen along to this album while I'm talking about it. Get your own thoughts about it and just let me know, email in and let us know what you think about them, and maybe like myself, you never heard any of these songs before now and are blown away. But to summarise, I think See Here is one of my favourite Rory Gallagher songs from this era, and What's Going On would be one of my favourite Rory Gallagher songs of all time. On the Boards is an incredible track, and I think really showcases the potential of this band.